Governor Jim Province with the Toledo Blade. Could you tell us whether or not these people that are going to be released from prison, potentially released from prison, will be released into the parole system? And if so, you have expressed some concern recently about the ability of that system to track people after they've been released from prison. How does that dovetail with this decision?
You know, that's going to, what happens with these individuals is going to be up to the judge and the conditions that that judge might set. I would again say that, you know, we're talking with two select groups of people. One are women with children, or women who are pregnant, or women who have just recently had children. The other group is people that are very close to be coming out. So these are individuals that, you know, would be out within 60 days anyway. But with the coronavirus and the added danger that we have in our prisons, it just made sense to start looking through. And the director's team, and my team, you know, have been very, very careful as they go through there. So it's within 100, I don't know what I said, but it's 120 days of release, those individuals. And that one group, the other group are the women that are in that situation. So it's two very defined groups. You know, we will continue to look, frankly, at other individuals. We're not going to release anybody, you know, who's a sex offender. We're not going to release anybody who's a murderer. Not going to release a long list of different crimes. But these individuals, it seemed to make sense. But ultimately, this is going to be up to the judge, and the judge that either heard the case or the judge that occupies the seat of the judge who heard the case. So what we wanted to instill here is a local control and a local input. Prosecutor has the right to have input, victim has the right to have input, and it just seemed to be a process that made sense in a very, very difficult time for everyone.
And will you supply us with a list of all 38 individuals?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we can make that, we'll make that available to you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, this is Danny Eldridge with Hannah News Service. Can you talk a little bit about how much of a difference releasing 38 prisoners will make, and how many more could possibly be released? How many are you looking at?
Well, I think we start with the understanding that each of the individuals who is there has been convicted, most of them found guilty by a jury, if not by a jury, by a judge. They've been sentenced under Ohio law. So, you know, you start off with that, and there has to be, it seems to me, the executive, the governor, has to have respect for how that person got there. What we're looking at is a coronavirus that we're trying to keep out of our prison, but we also know it is a group of people coming together. For example, pregnant women are in general population. So they come in contact, the director could tell you how many, but they could come in contact with a number of other people. So I have a concern about the unborn child. I have a concern, we have a few women, because of when the child was born, who actually have the child in prison. So I worry about those children in prison. So, you know, each one of these cases is unique. So no one is saying that, you know, taking this many people out of prison is going to open up a lot of space in our prisons. We're not saying that. But what we're doing is trying to be very careful, very respectful of the local courts, very respectful of the local victims, very respectful of public safety. That's why we set a pretty strict or very strict criteria about who we would even think about or who we would even consider. Will we look at additional? Yes, we certainly could look at additional ones, but we want to take this very, very carefully, very methodically, and with due respect to public safety.
So why not use your commutation power or pardon power to do this? Why do it the way you're doing
We
it?
certainly could have done that. I felt that in these cases that we wanted local input. We needed that local input. We wanted to allow the local community to have input through that common pleas judge. So the final decision goes with that judge. But obviously, out of 48,991, this is the small number of people that we're sending back to the courts, and I think the courts will look at that and say, look, they pick these individuals out, but ultimately that court has the final say. We want that court to have the final say in these cases.
Thank you.
Hi, Governor. This is Molly Martinez with Spectrum News. Are there plans for Ohio to increase the eligibility of children and adults who qualify for state Medicaid programs? And also, does Ohio have any plan to submit the 1135 waiver?
Okay, I'm not sure what the 1135 waiver is. Maybe John does. He can bail me out here. But,
it's for Medicare medical services, and it gives it
look,
bolsters the state's
Medicaid. What happens when you have an economy going down, which obviously we do, is two things happen. Costs go up for state government, and we would expect to see Medicaid costs and rolls go up dramatically. At the same time, tax revenues goes down because people are not making as much money. I mean, the obvious one where I have some numbers on, I think our gasoline consumption is down 30 to 40%. That's a lot less money going to the local townships, the villages, and the cities, as well as to the state to build roads and to fix roads. So that's the situation we're in. And so that's what we have to balance as we move forward. So we're into some, as the public has difficult times with people unemployed, obviously those of us who run state government, the Speaker, the Senate President, the minority leaders of the House, the Senate, are going to have to make some very, very tough decisions in that respect as well about, frankly, what to cut and where to cut. John, you want to add anything?
No, I think that just the little that I can say is that there are a lot of issues surrounding the costs and the benefits that, in terms of what the cost crunches on hospitals and nursing homes and the Medicaid system, and all of those have budgetary impacts. And we are in the process of trying to understand where our revenues are, where our expenditure opportunities are, and trying to figure that out in terms of what we're going to be able to continue to offer or what new we could offer. And so it's an elaborate conversation with a cost-benefit analysis of all of these things, and we're just working through it right now. We don't have answers on those questions yet.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Ben Schwartz from WCPO in Cincinnati. Governor DeWine, I want to ask you if you're aware that some clinics inside grocery stores are allowing sick people in, and with Ohio's largest healthcare systems opting for drive-through testing instead, I'm wondering if you think sick people should not be allowed to go into those types of clinics.
Well, I hadn't thought about that, but obviously that is, now that you point out, that is true, that is occurring. Look, that's something we can look at. I guess I would defer to, again, the doctors and the medical experts in regard to that. But that certainly is a consideration. I think it is a reason why, people who work there may certainly want to consider wearing masks. That doesn't give them complete protection, but it is something. It's why I think you're going to start seeing in Ohio and other states more and more people who are just out wearing some type of protection. Again, understanding it's not a complete protection, but I think we're going to see more and more of that. And I think more and more of our fellow Ohioans who decide to go out, when they go out to get groceries, when they go out to go to the pharmacy, I think you're going to start seeing a lot more protection on, and I think that's probably a good thing.
Thank you.
Dr. Acton, you got anything?
That is a fascinating question, and I've heard concerns along that line. I know we have to remember that for some folks, this is their primary care, but I have seen that some of the in-house pharmacies and clinics are actually putting out guidance to the patients about being able to do it through telemedicine and through a drive-up curb experience, or come in at a very distinct time, and they're starting to construct barriers. So I think that's a work in progress to try to, as we're doing all of this, we also have to be so careful to not create a barrier to access to care, especially for folks who have nothing else. So thank you, though. It's a great point.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Kevin Landers, WBNS 10 TV. My question is for Dr. Acton. Happy Friday. Initially during this epidemic and to this day, there are people who are getting false negative test results, and those results may have given people a false sense that they didn't have COVID-19 and they went about their business possibly infecting others. What percentage of false negatives has the Department of Health received, and how much do you think that contributed to the result of the spread in our state?
So I don't believe that we are able to collect false negatives, so I'll double check on that. I think a lot of that would go back to the provider straight up, and is not being reported as like another patient came back again and the next time they were positive. So the problem with the test is it depends where you are in your course of illness, and that's another reason why I keep saying I think we should all assume we might have it at any given time. There's also not perfect science on when people stop shedding the virus. So it's tricky. And so if you're early in your course of illness, you might not produce enough of a viral load basically that you'll be detected. And similarly, we are now using clinical guidance more than testing, because we don't have it available, to tell people when to stop when they have recovered. The CDC has put out guidance on 3 days post-fever, 7 days post-infection. But these are imperfect things, and so even if you test negative and you were a person who was tested one time, it doesn't mean that you won't test positive later in the course of your illness. So keep talking to your provider, keep sharing your clinical symptoms, and we'll have to work with you through that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Laura Bischoff, Dayton Daily News. I guess this is a question for both Dr. Acton and Governor DeWine. Both of you have said that public health funding should be beefed up, and that there has kind of been a long neglect of enough funding for public health. How do you plan on kind of sustaining the investment that you've made and maybe building on it after this pandemic, given that tax revenues are about to crater?
Well, I think it's a long-term goal. I think when you have long-term goals, you can achieve them. Are we going to be able to achieve a ramping up as far as dollars in the next 6 months? Probably not. We're not going to see increase in spending in hardly anything except the things that absolutely have to go up. But I do believe that one of the really positive things that's going to come out of this horrible tragedy is a public awareness of, yes, in Ohio there's 113 health departments. Yes, those health departments are important. We don't hear from them most of the time. We don't pay any attention to them most of the time, but they're out there working every single day to keep us safe. One of the statistics that Dr. Acton always cites is if you look at the increase in the longevity of Americans in the last 50 years or 100 years, most of it's come from public health issues more than something dramatic or discovery of a new drug or something. So public health is very important. When I took office, one of the things that I focused on, and one of the reasons that I was so careful in picking a health director, frankly, is I felt we needed to improve public health in the state of Ohio. I felt that we needed to start moving forward and paying more attention to it. So my commitment will be to do that. Are we going to be able to do that overnight? No, we're not. It's going to be a tough time for the next 6 months, next year, as far as anything having to do with anything that costs money. Dr. Acton?
Well, public health has been with us since John Snow and cholera, way back in the 1700s and the 1800s. This field goes a long way, and it's always been a battle of letting people know how very much this collective population-based health really impacts their well-being. So the governor has been an amazing leader on the health and well-being of all Ohioans. It's been clear to me from the very beginning that has been at the top of his agenda. We were already hard at work, even through my last budget cycle, working with the legislature, already making some moves, but on modernizing Ohio's public health system. And we will continue that in every way possible. Some of it is a money thing, but it's more than that. Some of it is creating new systems and structures that better fit the needs of the era we live in. Obviously, things like the pandemic that we are experiencing now, but there are new threats to our health in Ohio, things like drug addiction, suicide. Some of these are solved differently, and our laws are a bit antiquated. They're mostly sanitary laws from almost a century ago. So we are fully committed to the long haul in this, and fully committed to giving Ohioans the health and well-being that they deserve and a chance. You know what, my definition, my mission statement is creating the conditions in which all Ohioans can lead flourishing lives and contribute to their full potential. And that is a vast undertaking in partnership with the health system and nonprofits in all segments, including business, to create those conditions. So thank you.
Laura, I might add one more thing. Not everything connected with public health comes out of the health department. I mean, if you look at what we've tried to do in the last year with more home visits for pregnant women who are in difficult circumstances because of poverty or drug addiction, that's public health. What we're doing in our schools in regard to young people to more social emotional learning, so they are better armed to protect themselves from addiction in the future, that's public health. And we could go on and on. So we've had a real focus on it, not just in the health department, but public health. One thing we found is public health permeates almost everything that we do. And so that's a focus that will continue. And we will continue to work to build up the health department, but also work to continue to do everything we can with the other departments in state government and the local ones, really, that have something to do with public health.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Lucia Valencios. I'm from Ion, Ohio. I just have a couple quick questions for Dr. Acton, please. Hi. Sorry, I'm looking at you. So every day you're looking at bed and ventilator counts, correct?
Can you continue with your question? I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Every day you're looking at bed and ventilator counts, correct?
We're trying to get an assessment of what the resources are in Ohio. It's a moving target. There's no one place that you get those answers. For example, one thing we're working very hard on right now is doing an assessment of all the outlying ventilators that maybe are in ambulatory surgical facilities that were used for elective surgeries. We've looked to places you wouldn't suspect, like zoos, that have ventilators that are used for large animals. So we're doing an inventory right now of our entire state.
Okay, great. And once you have that inventory collected, I don't know if Florida does it. For example, they have a data where they break it down by hospital. And I want to thank you so much for working so hard on your site, because it offers a lot of great data resources for journalists. Do you plan to use that and to put that on your site as well?
As much data as we can get that we can think is actually accurate, we are sharing. And some of it is in partnership with the Ohio Hospital Association. Some of this data is we're looking at everything from PPE to bed counts to trying to get a sense of what equipment in terms of masks are out there, etc. One of the troubles we have is that system doesn't actually use nursing homes or first responders, so some of that is being gathered through the EMA site, and it changes. One of the hard things we're seeing is I know the governor is trying so hard to get a sense of when we can buy or when we can find resources, how much do you actually need? And that's very complicated as well. It has to do with burn rates. What does a hospital typically use in a day? And it's not like you can look in folks' closets to see what somebody might be using, what beds might be available at 1 p.m. might be different at 3 p.m. But just like with zip code data, whatever we can get our hands on, I promise you we will share it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sean Cudahy with WHIO. Another data question, I guess, for Dr. Acton, about the curve. We've been looking at some of the data from Ohio State, and by our count, I think we're at 5 straight days now with fewer new cases than what they had projected. Is that along the lines of what you're seeing, and should we be looking at this as a good sign that Ohioans have been successful in slowing the curve?
Well, a lot of our data, once again, is limited by the testing we're doing. So it could be very complicated. We never look at one day, we look for trends, but I see you using 5 days. So my hope, I've asked the modelers, they are gonna be demonstrating a new demo for us, taking into account the data. My sincerest hope is that they will continue to share what they have been sharing, which is that every move Ohioans are making is making a dent. That's why sometimes you see the date for the peak pushing out further. I don't know if we could pull up our curve here, but the farther away it gets, as frustrating as having another day of doing all this would be a blessing for Ohio, because every day that we're doing this great social distancing and we're slowing the spread of infection, we're slowing the doubling time and spread, is another day General Harris and all the hospitals and all the providers are getting ready. It's another day to try to find more equipment for the front lines. It's another day that we don't overwhelm our hospital system in some of the ways we're seeing on the nightly news right now. So our modelers are gonna keep sharing the best data they can as we get a more robust system. But I just wanna put this caveat, there's a lot of talk about modeling right now. And it is a rough gauge. It gives you, go north by northeast. It's similar, as I keep saying, to the forecasts of hurricanes. It gets more refined with time, but it's based on assumptions that are incomplete by the nature of the fact that we have a disease that we don't know that much about yet. As much as we're learning, there's still so much more to learn. Deaths and illness follow weeks and months behind the actual spread of infection and the first cases. So our death counts and things like that are not that robust of information that you put into modeling yet. And the fact that at any time something might happen that gives us another tool in this. So our modelers, I'm very, very proud of the work that the Infectious Disease Institute and others are doing in Ohio. I think we have some of the most sound data out there, and I look forward to sharing more of that in the days to come. And this is our famous curve, so I just asked if you would pull it up. But I think, we were originally forecasting somewhere here in late April to mid-May. We already know that number's starting to stretch with data in the last few days. And what we really want is that we pull it, it's almost like pulling it out farther. We want to keep flattening it by extending the date of that peak, making that peak over several days more shallow. Hope that makes sense. But the modelers they're heroes. Again, you put yourself out there when you're a scientist, putting your information out there, and I call them the force because they are one. Thank you.
This is Laura Hancock with Cleveland.com, and I have a Question for Dr. Acton about local health departments. Thank you for working with them on the zip code issue. But the lack of information does go further than that. Sometimes we don't know the gender, we don't know the age of a person who's died. In Mahoning County, which leads the state per capita in deaths, we don't know if it's in Youngstown city limits or somewhere else. So like we're being asked to collectively make sacrifices to our freedoms, movement, and commerce. So transparency would make the situation more real. Are you planning to provide more guidance to the health departments in what they release?
Yeah, thank you, Laura. We're working so closely with our local health departments, and it really is situation dependent, and it is about the investigation time. So some of what we're seeing unfold, again, I'm wearing my Youngstown, which is Trumbull and Mahoning, as you know, pin for a reason today, because I know they're being very hard hit there, but those investigations are still ongoing. So I know it's hard to be patient. I think as we have more data, certainly families and others are choosing to maybe share their story, and that's very different than having your loved one, when you haven't even had a funeral yet, not that knowledge being out there. And you really have to ask, Laura, like, what is that useful to the rest of us, that person's information? So as it's an aggregate form, as we can do it in ways that isn't about, we've had people that have been willing to come forth and share their personal story, but we really need to allow the time for all of that to take place. And we will share, again, lots more demographics about who dies and who doesn't, who's sick and who doesn't. The only information, I read the New York Times article just earlier today on what the CDC has or hasn't released in terms of sex. And I think it's so early in this to tell sometimes what that data actually means. It's going to be layers upon layers of science to help elucidate that. But we will, again, anything that I can do in a way that doesn't jeopardize very private healthcare information. I think it is an unusual time, and we're sharing certainly far more than that, I promise.
Thank you.
Hello, it's Andrew Welsh-Huggins with the Associated Press, and I think this would be for Governor DeWine. Governor, as you're probably aware, the Ohio Association of Food Banks today put out an emergency request for $25 million in state funding. They painted a pretty dire picture of that perfect storm of being overwhelmed because of the economic situation. The grocery stores, some of their usual sources for food, have their own problems in terms of tightened supplies. I think they're also, frustrated, like we all are, with people perhaps not being able to get on SNAP benefits quickly enough. So, specific question would be, have you thought about that request for the $25 million? And then more generally, what could the state do to help with this specific problem that the food banks are facing with such overwhelming need?
Well, it's very concerning. We're looking at it, and we'll have something shortly about that. But it's something that we can't allow to happen. We have to make sure that food banks have the food that they need. So it certainly is a priority.
Thank you.
Hello, Governor. Ben Garber with ABC6 and Fox 28. I have a question about testing. We've gotten some feedback from a lot of viewers that they don't believe there is necessarily a shortage of tests because they're hearing a different narrative coming from President Trump and people in the federal government about the availability of tests. Can you give us a sense for why is there a disconnect between what we're hearing from the federal government and what we're hearing from many governors like yourself? And if there were more tests, what would the state potentially be able to do differently?
Well, I'm going to let Dr. Acton answer the last part. I'll take the first part. We look at testing every single day, and we look at what we can do to expand testing. From the beginning, there's been a shortage. But when you drill down to it, there's a lot of different moving parts, a lot of variables. And I went through that today, and when I talked about, I'm looking at my little chart that I've made for myself here, but when we look at testing, it's not only does a hospital have the capacity to test. I mean, for example, Cleveland Clinic, Metro Health, UH, OSU, you know, collectively, they have a pretty broad depth of ability to test in a day. What we've seen is that they're not getting enough tests in. Two reasons. One, some of the tests have been going to the private labs, and that's okay, except it's been taking 5 or 6 days. So we had to stop that. We said, look, these need to go into the places, either the state lab or these four hospitals that clearly can crank this stuff out. But it gets more complex than that. What we're seeing is smaller hospitals aren't able to do the testing. We're not seeing the testing be able to done. Why? They don't have a swab. They don't have a swab. There might not be the tube. There might not be the liquid that goes in the tube. So what we're trying to do is to put all this together and try to make sure that we can surge in and take care of that. So what we hope with this new arrangement between Ohio State and our health department, we're going to try to get this stuff out to them so they can take the swab, they can put it in the tube, they can get it to Ohio State or Cleveland Clinic. And so it's a lot more complex than it looks like. Bottom line is we have not had enough testing. I'm going to go to Dr. Acton to tell you about the importance of testing. But it's important. We're doing everything that we can, and we're really focused on.
Hi, Ben. So there is a shortage of just about anything you can imagine right now. We're now hearing about shortages even of medicines. So every time, I don't know that all of it is, people are looking for folks to blame and intentional. There's just, when they look back at the history of this, they're going to see so many confounding, interrelated things that affected testing and PPE and everything. But one of the things we found is in the beginning, it was a different set of reasons. It was, a lack of the actual reagents to run the test in our labs. Then it was the components, swabs and media. And as soon as possible, as soon as they knew that you could use a variety of swabs, then that was made known. We can now use actually saline instead of the viral transport media, but it's still better to have the media in terms of preserving the specimen. So there are a lot of missing parts, and then there's no one person out there whose job it is to go find the random swab in one doctor's office cupboard and go find the tube wherever it's made, somewhere in a chem lab at OSU. And so it's just, all the parts and pieces are in short supply. In addition, some of the testing that has gone to market, and you often hear about it from a corporation, for instance, there was the high throughput Cepheid testing, and then there was something through Roche, but those machines can't be found. And as soon as there was a test, every machine disappeared from the marketplace. So, companies that actually make the components can't build them fast enough to scale. So it might be announced that it's out there, but in Ohio, we can't get our hands on a single machine. And these machines sometimes cost millions of dollars. So, and those companies, they're trying their best. We were on a phone call with Abbott Labs, and they're amazing, and they have some new testing that we'd love to have, but there's just a limited amount in their production line so far of the actual kits. So we're gonna get some machines here in Ohio, but they're having to be fair, and they're having to distribute their supplies equitably across the states. And so we take orders, we ask for 1,000, and we get 100 because they've had to divide scarce resources across many states. So it's very complicated, but we're maximizing that. We have whole teams of people who are like constantly on the phone calling, seeing what's out there, and we're not alone. Every state is facing this. So testing in the end allows us to quickly identify who is infectious and then go out with that great contact tracing and get to everyone around them and tell them they have been exposed. You immediately isolate the ill, quarantine the exposed. And when you can do that in a really population-based way across our whole state, we will be able to really focus on the people who are really ill, and we won't have to worry as much about just all of us having to take actions. So in the end, it'll be part of our exit strategy, and there'll be blood testing as well to see if you ever had it in the past. So complicated, the testing thing. I can just tell you that Ohio, on every one of these short supply issues, I look to the governor because he's, constantly saying, what more can we do? What more can we do? What more can we find? What more could we make? And we promise to maximize the scarce resources we have.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Adrienne Robbins, NBC4, and Dr. Acton, my question may be for you, it may be for the governor, but I was wondering if you could expand on how exactly OSU and ODH are going to make sure that these products are produced in Ohio. Were they produced previously and we just weren't ordering from Ohio, or is this part of the Manufacturing Association of businesses coming forward and saying we can fill that gap?
First of all, it's a new collaboration. They've come together because of a need. And they see the need, and they think they can fill it, and they know they can fill it. So I asked them on our call this morning, when can we do this? And I said, we're doing it, we're rolling. I said, when can you start getting it out to hospitals? And they said the next several days. So I think we're rolling.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, Andy Chow with Ohio Public Radio and Television State House News Bureau. Question for Dr. Acton. Doctor, a few days ago you warned people to try to minimize their essential trips and try to really strategize. Does that also go for carry-out, people who are maybe wanting to go to a restaurant to pick up food? And what are some of the do's and don'ts that people should really keep in mind as they do go to carry-out?
First of all, I just want to say thank you. Many businesses are continuing the carry-out. I forget, the Lieutenant Governor might know, but some 50% of what we eat comes through getting meals on carryout in this day and age. So if you think about that, many people rely on that for their food. And so it's really important that we still have that lifeline to the things we need. But some of the simple precautions folks can take, wiping off packaging that it comes in is certainly one of the things you can do. And obviously, we're really relying on the great hygiene of the folks making the food. And I know that's something that businesses take very, very seriously. It's something another factor is health departments do food inspections, and these businesses are often approved for their good hygiene. So that's important in the making of the food, but certainly outside packages has been some advice that the CDC has loosely given as a way to sort of wipe that off on the outside before you open it. But I do think a lot of these same businesses are, and I've spoken to a few, are getting food to workers in some of these high essential businesses. Thanks to Donato's, who put out pizza to a lot of our frontline workers. And they're also helping work with a lot of, we've talked a lot about the food pantries. So there's a lot of synergies going on where some of these very same businesses are helping be part of the solution. Thank you.
This is Jackie Borchert from the Cincinnati Enquirer. My question is for Governor DeWine. Governor DeWine, there are nearly 90,000 medical marijuana patients in this state. I've heard from a number of them who are concerned that they still have to leave their homes and go into a medical marijuana dispensary to pick up their medicine. Would you consider allowing delivery or curbside pickup for these patients? Many of them are over age 60 or have a underlying health condition that puts them at risk. Other states have allowed such services.
Well, I certainly wouldn't rule that out. That's something I would ask our team to look at and to look at what the situation is for these individuals.
Do you have plans to allow curbside delivery or pickup?
I don't have any plans because I hadn't really thought about it, but because of your question, we will look at that.
I have one update to the question that Molly Martinez from Spectrum asked earlier. The 1135 waiver, CMS gave a blanket waiver they issued on Monday night. That does not take care of everything under this issue, or surrounding this issue, but the remainder of those things that were not waived by CMS are under consideration as we go through the budget process.
Good afternoon, Ray Vedlo with the Columbus Dispatch. I'm informed I'm the last questioner, and I would like to pose a question to the governor. Good afternoon, Governor. Under your new dispute resolution process involving what is an essential business, what is not, and rendering a ruling in any disputes, what authority in law gives either you or the Director of Health the authority to institute such process?
Well, it's a delegated authority. I'm not going to play lawyer here, Randy, but the local health departments, have the ability to interpret our order, and it's actually Dr. Acton's order, and so we have the authority to interpret that. If they have that authority and there's a conflict, there needs to be a way to resolve that, and this is a logical way to resolve that.
Okay. As a lawyer for most of your life, a prosecutor, attorney general, are you comfortable with a process that has no appeal process?
Well, the normal process, first of all, there's rules that we think are understandable, but occasionally you're going to have reasonable people who interpret a rule differently, and there needs to be a process by which this can be resolved. It seems to be a logical way. John wanted to add something, then I'll come back if you want to add something.
I think it might be helpful if we could provide the genesis for why we put that in there. Frankly, it's because the health departments ask us to. In many cases, they feel in conflict. A lot of the elected officials who are involved with those health departments have felt in conflict. And so we were frankly just trying to respond to what we heard from the field about providing greater clarification. So it wasn't that we were trying to intervene, nudge ourselves into the process. We were frankly feeling like we had the responsibility to help sort some of those issues out, and that's why the dispute commission was created.
Thank you.
Well, before we close, an announcement. We will be back tomorrow, but our goal is not to be here on Sunday. We've tried this a couple other Sundays, it's never worked, so we'll see how that works. But for our news media friends who have to come in and cover this, the goal will be not to be here on Sunday. We will see how it works out.
Betty.
We're going to close with two videos. One from Katie Smith, native of Logan, Ohio,
We have
great
sunshine
basketball
today,
player,
don't we?
and
And
also
you
we're
love
going to
it.
hear from Cleveland
Yes,
Indians
you
third
do.
baseman Jose Ramirez. We look forward to these videos, and we wish you all a good day on
You're a
what
sweetheart.
looks like it's been a beautiful day, at least in central Ohio.
Hi everyone, this is Katie Smith. I know it's some really tough times and some uncertainty.